Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, Chapter 12. Back to the Chocolate Factory. Crash! And then the noise of splintering wood and broken glass and absolute darkness and the most awful crunching sounds as the elevator rushed on, smashing everything before it. All at once, the crashing noises stopped, and the ride became smoother, and the elevator seemed to be traveling on guides or rails, twisting and turning like a roller coaster. And when the lights came on, Charlie suddenly realized that for the last few seconds he hadn't been floating at all. He had been standing normally on the floor. Mr. Wonka was on the floor too, and so was Grandpa Joe and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, and also the big bed. As for Grandma Josephine, Grandma Georgina, and Grandpa George, they must have fallen right back into the bed, because they were now all three on top of it and scrambling to get under the blanket. "We're through!" yelled Mr. Wonka. "We've done it! We're in!" Grandpa Joe grabbed him by the hand and said, "Well done, sir! How splendid! What a magnificent job!" "Where in the world are we now?" said Mrs. Bucket. "We're back, Mother!" Charlie cried. "We're in the chocolate factory." "I'm very glad to hear it," Mrs. Bucket said. "But didn't we come a rather long way around?" "We had to," said Mr. Wonka, "to avoid the traffic." "I have never met a man," said Grandma Georgina, "who talks so much absolute nonsense." "A little nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest men," Mr. Wonka said. "Why don't you pay some attention to where this crazy elevator's going?" shouted Grandma Josephine, "and stop footling around." "A little footling roundabout will stop you from going up the spout," said Mr. Wonka. "What did I tell you?" cried Grandma Georgina. "He's round the twist. He's bogged as a beetle. He's as dotty as a dingbat. He's got rats in the roof. I want to go home." "Too late," said Mr. Wonka. "We're there." The elevator stopped. The doors opened, and Charlie found himself looking out once again at the great chocolate room, with the chocolate river and the chocolate waterfall, where everything was eatable. The trees, the leaves, the grass, the pebbles, and even the rocks. And there to meet them were hundreds and hundreds of tiny Oompa Loompas, all waving and cheering. It was a sight that took one's breath away. Even Grandma Georgina was stunned into silence for a few seconds, but not for long. "Who in the world are all those peculiar-looking little men?" she said. "They're Oompa Loompas," Charlie told her. "They're wonderful. You'll love them." "Shh," said Grandpa Joe. "Listen, Charlie. The drums are starting up. They're going to sing." "Hallelujah," sang the Oompa Loompas. "Hallelujah and hooray. Our Willy Wonka's back today. We thought you'd never make it home. We thought you'd left us all alone. We knew that you would have to face some frightful creatures up in space. We even thought we heard the crunch of someone eating you for lunch." "All right," shouted Mr. Wonka, laughing and raising both hands. "Thank you for your welcome. Will some of you please help to get this bed out of here?" 50 Oompa Loompas ran forward and pushed the bed with the 3 old ones in it out of the elevator. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, both looking completely overwhelmed by it all, followed the bed out. Then came Grandpa Joe, Charlie, and Mr. Wonka. "Now," said Mr. Wonka, addressing Grandpa George, Grandma Georgina, and Grandma Josephine, "up you hop out of that bed, and let's get cracklin'. I'm sure you'll all want to lend a hand running the factory." "Who, us?" said Grandma Josephine. "Yes, you," said Mr. Wonka. "You must be joking," said Grandma Georgina. "I never joke," said Mr. Wonka. "Now just you listen to me, sir," old Grandpa George said, sitting up straight in bed. "You've got us into quite enough troubles and tumbles for one day." "I haven't gotten you out of them, too," said Mr. Wonka proudly, "and I'm going to get you out of that bed as well. You see if I don't."